Some psychological tactics are so precise, they don't feel like attacks when they're happening. They feel like love, like finally being seen by someone extraordinary. And by the time you understand what was actually happening, the damage is already done. Not after this video. Before we go in, I want to say something to you directly. If you searched for a video about dark manipulation tactics, you're probably not here because you want to hurt someone. You're here because something happened. Something that left you confused, hollowed out, unable to fully explain it to the people around you. Because from the outside, the person probably looked wonderful, charming, the kind of person your friends envied you for having in your life. And behind closed doors, something was deeply wrong. You felt it, you just couldn't name it. That gap between what you felt and what you could prove is not a coincidence. It's a feature of these tactics. The most effective manipulation systems are built specifically to be invisible from the outside and disorienting from the inside. You weren't naive. You weren't weak. You were targeted by something specifically engineered to defeat exactly the kind of trust and openness that makes you a good person. And understanding how it works isn't dark. It's the only reliable protection. So, 4 tactics. Let's drag them into the light. Tactic 1. Love bombing, followed by devaluation. This one comes first because everything else gets built on top of it. You can't fully understand the other 3 without this foundation. Love bombing is the rapid, overwhelming deployment of affection and idealization, almost always at the very beginning of a relationship. And when I say overwhelming, I mean it literally. Daily messages before you've even defined what you are. Deep declarations of connection after just a few weeks. I've never met anyone like you. I feel like I've known you my whole life. It feels extraordinary because it's designed to feel that way. What's actually happening in your brain is a flood of dopamine and oxytocin, the same chemicals involved in addiction and deep bonding. Research into the neuroscience of attraction has shown that early, intense love activates the same reward pathways as cocaine. Love bombing is the deliberate manufacturing of that state, getting someone chemically conditioned to need your presence before the real dynamic begins. And then the shift happens. Not dramatically, subtly. The texts slow down. The warmth cools. A comment lands wrong. And your brain, which has been wired to need this person's validation, goes into withdrawal. You don't recognize it as withdrawal. You experience it as a desperate need to get back to the way things were. You start adjusting yourself, softening your needs, tolerating things you never would have before. Every time they briefly return to warmth, the relief is so intense it reinforces the whole cycle. The tell, looking back, is almost always the speed. Real connection builds through time and shared experience. Love bombing arrives all at once, fully formed, before there's any foundation to hold it. If someone made you feel like the center of the universe in the first few weeks, and then slowly made you feel like you had to earn that feeling back, what you experienced wasn't a relationship, it was a system. Tactic 2. Triangulation. If love bombing is the engine, triangulation is the accelerant. Triangulation is the deliberate introduction of a third party into a 2-person dynamic, specifically to manufacture insecurity, jealousy, and quiet competition. And it's one of the most efficient control tactics that exists, because it outsources the manipulation to your own imagination. It might start casually. An ex mentioned a little too warmly. A co-worker whose name keeps coming up with some comment about how impressive they are. A phone lights up with a message, and there's a half smile that never gets explained. Small things, individually, but they accumulate, and they are never accidental. The goal is a permanent, low-grade state of insecurity, just uncertain enough about your position that you're constantly, subtly working to secure it. You become more accommodating, less likely to raise concerns, because you don't want to push them towards someone who doesn't cause problems. The most sophisticated version doesn't even require a real person. Sometimes it's abstract. Everyone I've ever been with was easier than this. An unnamed, faceless comparison you can never actually compete with. You're being measured against a ghost. And the cruel irony is that triangulation tends to deepen attachment rather than break it. When we sense something valuable is at risk of being taken, we want it more. Psychologists call it reactance, the spike in desire that comes from perceived scarcity. The manipulator knows this. They are using your own psychology against you with precision. Tactic 3. Future faking. This one is quieter, less dramatic, but in some ways more corrosive, because it runs entirely on hope. Future faking is the practice of making vivid, specific promises about a shared future with no intention of fulfilling them. And the key word is specific. This isn't vague optimism. This is, let's go to Italy next spring, and I've been thinking about what our apartment would look like, and I want you to meet my family at Christmas. Every specific promise is an investment. Your brain begins building toward it. You start making real decisions, declining other opportunities, restructuring your expectations, emotionally committing to a version of your life that includes this person. And when it doesn't come, when Italy never gets planned, when Christmas arrives and the invitation doesn't, you're left with a grief that's almost impossible to explain. Because technically, nothing happened. But the promise felt real. The anticipation was real. The decisions you made on the basis of it were real. And the loss of an imagined future can be just as painful as losing something tangible. Future faking keeps people in dynamics far longer than they would otherwise stay, because there's always another promise just close enough to feel possible. Hope, weaponized. Tactic 4. Identity dismantling. This one is the most gradual and the one with the longest-lasting damage. Identity dismantling is a slow, systematic erosion of your sense of self. It rarely arrives as a direct attack. It comes through accumulation. A joke at your expense that lands just slightly too sharp. A comparison to someone who does something better than you do. A pattern of your opinions being gently corrected. Your taste quietly mocked. Your instincts consistently second-guessed. Each moment is deniable. You're so sensitive, it was just a joke. I'm only being honest because I care. But collectively, over months or years, a portrait gets painted, and you start to believe it, that you're difficult, that your judgment is unreliable, that you are, fundamentally, someone who needs to be corrected and managed by the very person doing the managing. What makes this so effective is what it produces. A person who is dependent on their abuser to define who they are. Because when your self-concept has been sufficiently destabilized, you stop trusting your own internal compass. You outsource your sense of identity to the person who dismantled it. And that dependency is precisely what makes it so hard to leave. Because leaving means walking into a self that's been stripped down to almost nothing. Trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk describes this as a loss of the felt sense of self, where a person no longer has reliable access to their own feelings and perceptions as a guide. They've been separated from themselves. That isn't an accident. That is the point. So what do you actually do? Because knowing the name of what happened to you doesn't automatically stop the responses these tactics are engineered to produce. You need real tools. The first is something therapists call the gray rock method. When dealing with someone manipulative, you become as bland, unresponsive, and uninteresting as a gray rock. Short answers, no emotional display, no engagement with bait. The reason it works? Every tactic we covered today requires your emotional reaction to function. Love bombing needs your excitement. Triangulation needs your jealousy. Identity dismantling needs your distress. Cut off the supply, and there's nothing to feed on. You're not suppressing your feelings internally, you're simply not performing them for someone who will use them against you. Second, audit the speed. In any relationship going forward, pay attention to pace. How quickly is this person trying to establish intimacy? How rapidly are deep declarations arriving before there's any foundation for them? Genuine connection is not in a hurry. When someone is moving at a speed that feels almost frantic, that speed is data. And third, document the promises. Not confrontationally, just as a personal habit. When someone makes a specific commitment, write it down with the date. Gaslighting and future faking both depend on your memory being the only record. When you have a written one, you hold an anchor to reality that no amount of reframing can move. Here's what I want to leave you with. Every single tactic we covered today, the love bombing, the triangulation, the future faking, the dismantling, all of them share one thing. They only work on people who are capable of love, of trust, of hope, of real connection. Your openness was not the flaw that got you hurt. Your openness is the best thing about you. What changes is not your capacity to trust. It's your ability to tell the difference between someone who deserves that trust and someone who is quietly mapping it for exploitation. That is a skill, and you just took a step toward building it. If this helped you make sense of something, subscribe. This channel exists for exactly this, to pull these tactics out of the dark, name them clearly, and hand you the tools to protect yourself from them. The next video is already on your screen.